Greetings, Grammar Pelusians. Thank you so much for your support. We are here today for your bonus episode with Rob Drummond, author of You're All Talk, a fascinating book about language and accents that's just newly out in paperback. Rob, thank you so much for being here.
Oh, thank you very much for having me.
You bet. So, there's so many things left to talk about that are fascinating about language that you covered in your book. Multilingualism was something that I thought was really fascinating in the way it interplays with identity and how people feel more comfortable or do different things in different languages or different accents.
Yeah, this is it ties in with what we're talking about in terms of style shifting. So people talk about style shifting and code switching, and often they'll just use the term code switching to mean to the general meaning of changing the way you speak, whether that's switching between languages or switching between varieties of the same language. I tend to use style shifting when we're talking about shifting between varieties of the one language. So, example, in English, switching between different kind of varieties of that or different registers of that. And I think of code switching between languages, but either term is fine. But they're very similar in a way, in that there's a kind of a very functional idea of code switching where obviously you change the way you switch in between languages because somebody can't understand you. So say you have a group of you're with a group of bilingual friends, and somebody joins the group who only speaks one of the languages. Then out of politeness, I guess most people would switch what they're saying into the language that everybody can understand. That's kind of pretty functional. But what if you're in a group of bilingual, multilingual speakers who all share the same languages? Which languages do people use then? And I think the experience of a lot of people is that they sort of dip in and out of different languages at different times. It's not as if they, rigidly in one language and then they switch to another, which is why a lot of people kind of reject the whole term, the whole idea and the term code switching, because it's too mechanical, it's too rigid. It gives the impression that you're in one language and then you switch to the other language and then you switch back to that language. And most people who have multiple languages will say it's a lot more fluid than that. And there are some people talk about it as use language as a verb. So the idea of languaging or translanguaging or just languaging, that language is something we do, it's not something we have. And anyway, I think people within having that experience of operating in multiple languages will consciously or often subconsciously choose different languages depending on the topic of what they're saying, the whole kind of context of what they're saying. And I had a PhD student look into this, and she was looking at her friendship group. Her whole PhD study was on her friendship group, who were all completely balanced bilinguals between Arabic. They were all Libyans, so Arabic and English. And she recorded they used to meet up socially all the time, and she recorded their conversations. And it turns out there was a real pattern to which language they would use in different situations. When they were talking about certain things, if it was to do with their studies, it would be in English. If they were talking about kind of politics, it might be in Arabic. And if they were being humorous with each other, it would be in English, and so on. And she kind of noticed these patterns, and it really kind of hit home how much, again, it relates to identity, to the identity and what we want to do with language in that particular context. And so how people who have one language might switch between different styles of speaking, depending on whether they're trying to be funny or trying to do whatever, or trying to be serious or what they're talking about. The same goes for people who have multiple languages. They just have a lot more to work with. So yeah, fascinating. That student's name was Hanan Ben Nafa, actually, and she was brilliant, really, really good. So yeah, I think it's a fascinating area. But it's to do with, it always comes back to identity. I think it comes back to the identity we want to project. And incidentally, this will resonate with people who do have multiple languages. People often talk about feel almost they have different personalities in different languages.
Hmm.
and they feel that maybe they're more confident. Maybe not talking about confident in, I'm confident speaking French, I'm confident speaking Spanish or whatever. Imagine they're fluent in 2 or more languages, but they're almost like a different person. And that might be to do with how they use that language in terms of who they interact with. If they use Spanish because their extended family are Spanish, then Spanish or might kind of conjure up ideas of friendliness, and they might feel more kind of, friendly and kind and confident in that way in that language. And they might have another language that they associate more with work, and that becomes more formal, or they feel a bit more, I don't know, less expressive in a particular language. So I just think it's fascinating how much the way we speak interacts with who we are.
Yeah, it really is. I can't imagine this next part has anything to do with identity, but maybe it does. The part about stammering in your book was also so interesting because, that people could influence the way the difficulty they had with stammering by changing accents or singing too. I thought that was so interesting.
Yeah, I think it does. Again, it really relates to our sense of identity, and I know this from personal experience because I used to. Well, I would say I still have a stammer, but you wouldn't hear it in this context, because in this context I'm kind of quite comfortable, and it wouldn't come. Um, but in certain situations, I still have it, and I used to have it quite badly when I was younger, when I was kind of a teenager and up until, I guess, early 20s. And the reason I think it relates, and even though my stammer was still relatively mild compared to some others I'll talk about, but it there are certain situations where I would know, and stammerers are good at this, and any stammerer will tell you, they know when they're about to stammer. They know which words. We're always thinking ahead when we're talking anyway. But I think people who stammer are even better at that. They're thinking ahead, and they know there's certainly in my experience, I would know. I'd be, a second ahead in the conversation, thinking I can't say that. Then I would change what I was going to say. Or sometimes it would just mean I couldn't say what I wanted to say. Or I'd be in a situation where, because for me, it's worse when there's lots of background noise, and there's loads of people talking, and I find it very difficult. And so I kind of, you think, you have something to say. I just wouldn't say it because I just know I'm not going to get it out. So I just say it. And I think, well, so I didn't think anything of it at the time, growing up with this. But now looking at it, I think, well, there are certain situations where people would think, wow, that Rob guy, he's a bit quiet. Why doesn't he say anything? Because I would just be really, really quiet, because it would just be pointless. I wouldn't be able to say it. I wouldn't be able to get it out. It would just be awkward. So again, it links to personality. So people might get a very wrong idea of my personality just because of this. And anyway, people with more serious stammers, there are certain ways. So there are loads of techniques for dealing with stammers, and one of them, or people have found that if they use almost a different voice, a different accent, things become easier. Or people find, yeah, they don't have a stammer when they're singing, which is really, really interesting.
Yeah.
It shows it's not a mechanical thing. It's a psychological thing. And I'm not an expert on stammering, by the way, at all. I just,
Okay.
I know a bit from personal experience, and I know a bit from reading. But I just think it's fascinating. Again, it you're using a different voice. It's almost you're becoming a different person, because the way I see the whole kind of style shifting and all of this is that, uh, we use our voice to, as I've said, kind of project a particular identity and create a particular identity. And so who we are is dictated in part by how we behave, and how we dress, and how we have our hair and makeup and tattoos and piercings, and how we carry ourselves. All of these things give an impression, give off an identity, and we use our voice to do that as well. That plays a big part. So what happens then when somebody doesn't have full control over that voice? is that kind of restricting part of their identity, or does that become part of their identity itself? So I think to me, as it was said before, spoken language is such an important part of who we are. So what happens when we don't have as much control over it as typically people do? I don't know. It's fascinating.
Yeah, and then there's this fascinating syndrome called foreign accent syndrome where people's voice is literally taken away from them by when they, wake up after a stroke or something like that, a terrible migraine with a new accent. And I remember when I first heard about this, I was skeptical it was even true, but it is a real thing, right?
It is. And I was also skeptical, and I'd heard about it, and I thought, and I remember when I was writing the book, I thought, is it even worth kind of putting in? And then I remember my editor actually thought, he was, it was, they were saying, no, this is really interesting. We should expand
Yeah.
this a bit more. So I did actually do a bit more digging. And once you start looking into it, it's more, there are quite a few examples. What's interesting, of course, is the way it's reported in the media is often very different from what's actually happening. So it's reported, and it has this name of kind of foreign accent syndrome, and people will say, oh, I had a bang on the head, or I suffered something, or I suffered an illness, and I woke up and I had a Australian accent or something, or a Chinese accent, or something really odd, as in really different with no relation to how they originally spoke. And of course, it's not really that. What it is that something, the illness or the bang on the head, or there's the physical thing has affected the way somebody speaks, and then it's interpreted as being a particular accent. Because we're always trying to, we're all, we're so in tune with voices, and we're always trying to place people, and we're trying to fit people into different boxes and say, well, that person has an American accent, that person has a Scottish accent, whatever. And so we're always looking for, as humans, we're looking to find patterns whenever we can, I guess. And so we hear a voice, and it's not the same voice, it's something different. And we think, subconsciously, I don't know, I'm saying we do this consciously, we just think, oh, well, that sounds like this accent, that sounds like a French accent. And so it's not that somebody has literally, woken up one day with a French accent. Somebody has had something that has affected the way they speak, and listeners, including themselves, interpret it as sounding like a bit like a French accent. But it's amazing. But again, I'm not an expert on the mechanics of it, but what I am interested in is then how people are perceived because of that, and what a huge kind of shock that must be, and what a huge change to their sense of self. As I keep saying, the way we speak is so central to who we are. When that changes, and it's central to who we are also in terms of how people perceive us. Crucially, we speak in a certain way, and that makes us who we are in part. But a big part of that is how we're perceived. Our identity arguably exists somewhere between the kind of a speaker and the listener. It depends how we're perceived. So if we then suddenly speak in a way that means we're perceived in a very different way, then that is going to have a huge effect. So again, it's a fascinating area. Whenever that link between language and identity is disrupted in some way, then I think it creates some very interesting situations.
Yeah. No, you said in your book that some people even move to a place where their accent would, or their new way of speaking might fit in a little better. It's really
Yeah,
sad actually that they would need to do that or
yeah,
feel like they needed to do that. So interesting. Well, the book is You're All Talk with Rob Drummond, and when you finish reading that, because you're going to definitely want to do that, Rob has some book recommendations for you to add to your to be read list. I love this part of the show. Rob, give us your book
yes, right.
recommendations.
Okay, so I've got three books now. This was now I don't so I read a lot, but I read for work. I read a lot of language books. So then outside of work, I don't tend to read anything to do with language books, anything to do with language. And the 3 books I've got. So the first one is, now this is a series of books. I've actually got it here because it's here, and it's called. This is by somebody called Julia Chapman, and this first one is called A Date with Death, and it's part of the. It's called the Dales Detective Series. It's set in the Yorkshire Dales, part of England, a really nice part of England. Now I have to come clean. I know Julia. I knew Julia before. I knew we worked together a long time ago, but this is before she started writing books. We used to be English teachers together. And this is a great book, and but it's like it's sometimes called like a cozy detective series, along the lines of like Richard Osman type books, and I think sometimes cozy kind of reading like is seen as a negative thing. To me, it's like perfect. It's like it's easy to read, and they're just lovely stories, and yeah, brilliant. So that's my first one, the Dales Detective Series.
I love
from
cozy
Julia
mysteries.
Chapman. Yeah, so it's great. The next one I haven't got with me is called it's called The Final Year, and it's written by a guy called Matt Goodfellow, and it's aimed at sort of children or young adults or even children, but it's about somebody's final year at what we would call primary school before they go to kind of high school, so age sort of 10, 11. And it's the most moving book I think I've ever read, and it's just absolutely brilliant. And it's one of those things where it's written for kids or young adults, but there's so much in it, and language wise, it's set in Manchester, where we're based. So some of the language is a bit it kind of represents the local language, and it's brilliant, absolutely brilliant book.
Is it fiction or nonfiction?
It's fiction. Yeah, this is fiction, and yeah, and he's done some more stuff now, and I think he's now written a book called The First Year, which is following the same kind of boy moving into his first year at high school, and I won't have done it justice, but honestly, it brought a tear to my eye. It's just a lovely book. And the last one is another fiction book, and this is called Little Bit, and it's by a guy called Alex Wheatle. And again, I knew Alex sadly died earlier this year from cancer, and he was a hugely kind of powerful voice in young adult fiction, and adult fiction as well, but young adult fiction especially. And he is a fascinating man. So have a look at Alex Wheatle's work. But I got to know Alex later, but I read this before I knew him, and I just thought it was brilliant. Again, it's a young adult. It's aimed at young adults, but I think a lot of young adult fiction is just so good, and it's brilliant. And again, it's really, and even though it's not, I say I don't read language books, but I do like it when they're clever with language, and he uses language in a really clever way to represent kind of young Black British sort of Londoners going about their lives, and just brilliant stories. And actually, can I tell you one thing about this, because it reminded me. So I'd read it, and I was really interested in the language, because at the time I was doing a project on youth language, on the language of young people, and he was sort of representing the language I was hearing. He was representing it in this. And I thought, this is amazing. He's doing it so well. When I finally got to meet him, I asked him, because I always thought, when you're doing studying language and poetry and literature at school, and you look at these poems, and you're trying to analyze what they mean. And my 15-year-old schoolboy would just think, well, why don't we just ask the poet? Why would just ask him what he meant? Let's not waste it. Just ask them. Anyway, I felt like this. I've got to meet Alex, and I was going, how did you do that? How did you represent that language? And I thought it was a really intelligent question. He just said, I don't know. I just did it. It's like, I don't know. That's what I hear. I hear it and I write it. And it was so good. Anyway, there's a series of those books as well. So that first one is called Little Bit, and it's Lickle, and it's like a different pronunciation of little. But yeah, there are
Wonderful.
three brilliant books.
Yeah, I mean, it's always great to have a series because if you love it, then there's more.
Yeah,
Well, Rob Drummond,
yeah.
thank you so much for being here again. The book is called You're All Talk, fabulous book about the way we speak. Rob, where can people find you?
So I'm just sort of around on social media. Just search for Rob Drummond, and you'll find me on most things on Blue Sky and X and Instagram and even TikTok now. Get me.
Oh, wow. Good for you. Well, thank you again so much for being here, and thanks to all the listeners. That's all. Thanks for listening.